Hello and welcome to another edition of Low Code Cafe. This is episode number 115 for November 2, 2022. Today we're going to talk about fresh Plantain app features in our new release version 1.23. And so we'll be most of the focus today will be on those new features. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Dale Warner. I'm head of support for Plantain app. I'm here today with Patrick Anderson on the panel. He is on the panel. He is our technical support manager. That's at least a title, but he fills in a large number of capacities, and I'm holding him today to help him make sure that I'm telling the truth on all of our new features. This is an event we do for our community every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central Time this hour, and it's a community webinar. We spend the biggest piece of our time on typically on hands-on coding. Today we'll be talking about product quite a bit. We welcome you to be our guest speaker if you have something that you would like to present and think it would be of interest to the Plantain app community. All of our past editions are recorded and you can see them on youtube.com/PlantainApp. We encourage you to go subscribe, get the alerts so that you know just as soon as we post new content out on that channel, you wouldn't want to miss an hour. Today's agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about some hot fixes that are coming out in my From the Trenches segment, and then we'll talk in the low-code development. We're going to be talking about the new features. Feel free to engage with us as we go along. You can use the chat window, the Q&A form. You can raise your hand if you would like to ask a question directly. And at the tail end, there's a feedback form, and we'd love to get your feedback. With that, we'll jump right into From the Trenches. We are at the very end of our 1.22 development and release cycle, meaning we're still releasing hotfixes to version 1.22. There are 23 releases previous today, and this week there's 5 new ones. A couple of note here I've highlighted in Plantain app green that there's a couple of things that our user community was waiting for. So there's a kind of a hidden feature where you could drag and drop text from one field to another using your browser window, but that stopped working if the file upload controls were added to the form. There was something about the presence of those that broke that. That has been that issue was reported long ago, and it came up and got resolved. So I'm sure we have at least one happy user on the call today on the webinar. Another one that came up was that the touch signature field wasn't working when it happened to be used in tabs. Sometimes these different products can conflict with each other, and so we have to work out those conflicts, and that one was done. Beyond that, you'll see a hotfix for creating an Excel from a SQL query wasn't sanitizing the pattern name, so slashes in the pattern name was breaking things. Drop down with checkboxes when you had very, very long items. They weren't rendering well within the browser in Bootstrap 5. So that's been resolved. And then if you used quotes in your toast message headings, those weren't being handled well either. So little fixes, and if they apply to you, you should install them. We run another event during the week, a weekly event, Low Code Campfire, and I encourage you to be part of that. We do that at 10 a.m. Central Time, the same hour on Fridays, and you can join. It's more interactive format. You can ask questions, get answers. Oftentimes we see breakthroughs in development projects when somebody's been just stuck on a particular point. So it's a very good one. This week, I'm sure, among other things, we'll be talking about our beta test because we're about to release the beta test for 1.23. We have some links for this episode. It's the ones, it's kind of our standard list of links. There's nothing unusual in this one. We have the ability to register in advance for the low-code Campfire, get to our webinar recordings on YouTube, access the community portal. I'll point out again that we offer live help through the community portal. It's an option up there at the top. So if you 2 or 3 hours a week, we spend time answering questions within the community, answering your questions directly, and you can show off what you've got and ask us specific questions. So that's a big value that we're adding back. Lots of people have taken advantage of that. We encourage you to as well. And then, we love to get feedback on this event, so use the feedback form. Great. With that, we'll get into the biggest piece of our puzzle today, the hands-on low coding, where we talk about our fresh features. So this first slide isn't just an overview, big picture about where we're moving in this development period and what we'll be delivering coming up. I think it's targeting November 14th will be our release date. So one of the big ones, we have several large new initiatives. One of them is called MIO, or Multi-Environment Orchestrator, and that's being released in an experimental state. We also have a version control, which we'll start to see in this release, token autocomplete, action validation, and so those are the new initiatives that you're going to start seeing things in our product. And then we have some continuing large initiatives. We announced and delivered some changes to the automation administrative user interface, the interface where you interact with it as a developer, interact with the product and set things up. So we have some new movement on that. And that's, again, part of a larger story where we are delivering changes to all of our administrative user interfaces. Beyond that, we have some things, some continuous improvement, bug fixes, and minor features that were added to the product. And we're starting to see some changes in our documentation. We'll point those out as well. So first, talking about multi-environment orchestrator, excuse me one moment. Trying hard to sneeze or not to. I won't be demonstrating this, but we have the multi-environment orchestrator, and this is part of our big story where application changes that you make in one application can be stored and retrieved to and from Git, and that enterprise clients will be able to publish changes to multiple environments. So what we're delivering is an experimental version of MIO, and MIO is a tool that lets you manage, backup, audit your different Planet app instances by using Git. With MIO, you'll be able to push and pull changes between environments, for example, from development to QA, QA to production, and that our on-client premises, our on-premise clients will need to install the MIO Docker package in order to take advantage of this. It's available experimentally, and you'll probably learn more in the beta. I'm not sure how much of this will apply to you at this point, but at this point, it's experimental. So I'm just telling you that it's there, and I don't have anything to demonstrate today. The next big story is version control, and we'll be demonstrating this next. This is along that same lines where application changes can be stored and retrieved to and from Git. And again, enterprise clients are going to be able to publish those changes to multiple environments through MIO. But what we're actually delivering is that you can now push application changes into a Git repository. We don't yet have the piece where you can pull them out, but that's in part of the stories that we will be delivering in versions to come. Excuse me. So the overview of that is that you have to configure Git, you have to have a Git repository, and then you can get the information from Git, the URL, the username, the personal access token that has at least the ability to read and write contents from Git. You make changes to your application once Git is configured, or version control is configured. And then version control can be, the new version control option can be used to push those changes to Git. So now we can get on into the, let's get our hands dirty and actually do some of this. I have a version 1.23 application, and I'll just warn you in advance, we're still working through finalizing it. So we could run into a bump or two here along the way. Hopefully it will show off well today. So we have a new version control option. This may end up someplace other than this bottom spot, but that's where it is at the moment. And the first thing it wants us to do is to set up our Git connection. So it's asking URL, username, personal access token. I have GitHub opened here and logged in. So I'm going to create a new repository and we'll just work through this. So this is going to be our LCC 115 live repository. And give it a name, try and spell things right. And I'm going to make this a private repository and create it. So the first thing we're going to get out of that is we'll have access to this URL, and that's the first thing that we need to put into Plant an App. So I'm going to do that. We also have my username, which we can go there and we'll do a copy and paste. My username is Dale-Warner. See if I can copy that and paste it into Plant an App. And then the last thing you need is a personal access token. Personal access token can be generated in settings. You go down to developer settings and personal access tokens. I'm going to use this fine-grained data token capability. And so we'll create a new token. And of course, it wants an authentication code. I think I have, bring that up here. And it is 624829. It's going to let me do that since I've confirmed myself. So this is going to be the LCC 115 live token. Anything we want. I'm going to let it stay valid for 30 days. And I want to give access only to select repositories. And I'm going to pick the one we just created. For permissions on the repository, we need to come down and pick, I think it's contents, but I'm going to check my notes here. Yeah, you need to be able to read and write contents. So that's the minimum one. And we'll save, we'll generate the token. We have a nice token here. By the time, by the way, by the time this is posted on YouTube, this token will be unavailable. So I'm not worrying about hiding it. So we'll paste it here, personal access token, and submit. You'll see a message that Git is connected, and it's going to give us the opportunity. It's going to give us the opportunity to initialize. So we'll do that. So the application as it is when we initialize is getting sent to Git. That is in progress. And now it tells us that those have been submitted to Git. We go back to Git and take a look at our repositories. And we look at this 115 live. It will tell us, we're going to look on the production branch. It'll show us the files that are there. And there is one commit here present. It is the initial commit that I did 27 seconds ago. So all the content from Plant an App has been pushed out there. So that's the setup, and then now version control switches to a different interface, and I'm almost certain that you're going to see some changes here in the way that version control interface is laid out and the options that are there, but we'll work through them as it is today. So for example, if we go to entities and create an entity, and I am going to create a namespace here. This is going to be the Café namespace. And we'll select that and then add some properties. Let's see. So this is going to be we'll do a company entity. We will display it in the menu, sure, just right at the root of the site. And we'll have a name. That will be our display name. We'll also make it sortable. So as we do this, notice that the history count jumps up. We see history and there's 16 things waiting now in history. This refers to the version control area. And so now we go in, we look, and in our version history, we can see our initial commit was done. And then the changes, there's a list of changes that are done. I'm going to expand this list out so we can see them all, but we can see that pages were created, modules were created, API methods were created, the entity was created. So lots and lots of changes that were done in the system. If I want to push this to Git, I can, what we do is we select the things that we want to include. And so I'm going to select all and include them all. And so they're going to move to the other side here. And with that, if you decide there's something you want to uninclude, you can move it back, but with the remove selected. But I want to commit them all. So we'll say commit. The title is and so this information is going to be transferred into Git. All of our changes, plus that title and description, it's committing it. And then we get a message here that the commit was successful. If we go back and look at our 115 live repository, we'll see now that production branch now has 2 commits out of the main. So there is the one that I did the initial commit for minutes ago, and then the live commit company entity, and we can see the full description of what was going on. So you can document what you're pushing to your Git repository and control exactly what goes in. The contents of this is generally like our earlier version. I haven't investigated enough to know that it's exactly like, but the idea is that everything necessary to build whatever you did in that environment is stored, and you'll be able to see the changes, see the differences, and eventually to recall them. So that's the basics of version control. We configure Git, do that initial commit, make some changes, and then use version control to push them. I need to create a test page, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to filter this looking only for visible pages, and I'm going to create a new page. This is going to be the test checkbox page. I'm going to need that in a little while. And I'm just going to do this to show what more we'll do another version control commit. So that'll be available to all users and editable by our developers. We'll save that. And notice that as we do that, the history count bumps up to 2. So we have a little bit more content in version control. And if we wanted to push that, we could do that as well. So we'll select everything and push it. And again, I'm not advocating that every little change that you do, that you push it. The idea is I just want to illustrate that changes can go, and we'll parse out and take a look at the information that was there. So we created the test checkbox page and the default module that goes with that, the enter title module. We'll commit those, and that's going to be the whoops. So with that. And it's successful. So I am going to refresh again and get a look and see now we have the test checkbox page as a commit. And if we were to take a look at it, it has just a couple of entries. One, some internal data that we have that covers menu options where this page was added to our internal references. And then the tab itself, all the things that are necessary to recreate that page. So pretty, I did that one. It's just pretty easy to see what's built in there. So hopefully version control will be of use to you to both make a backup of what you're doing within Plantain app, but then provide audit control to see what changes are going on as well. Great. That's again, that's part of a bigger story where we'll be able to go both ways. But at this point, we're just going one way, sending it to Git. And again, feel free to ask questions along the way. The next one we'll talk about is token autocomplete. And so this again is where we have a big story and a delivered story. The big story is that we want tokens are essentially variables that get used throughout Plantain app in a variety of ways. And what we want to do is to be able to autocomplete in an IntelliSense kind of way. Autocomplete is going to help the developer build tokens by suggesting the right syntax. What we have delivered is that we're doing this autocomplete is available in the automation developer user interface. Again, we're working hard to get automation right before we roll that out to the remainder of the product. But it's available on many of the parameters for core tokens. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. Again, within tokens, we have this core tokens namespace, and it has things like host and user and membership and cookies and get set session, a variety of things. These are the core tokens that are available. And again, it's only available in the automation section. So we'll create a new job. I am going to assign it to that Café namespace that I created a little while ago and select that. And the job is going to be, this is a job to demonstrate. We won't put in any triggers, but we will add an action. For example, you might want to send an email. In the email, you've got these various fields, and so one of them might be the from field, and you might want to make it from the user's email. When you type a bracket, you'll start to get the suggestion, and so we can choose user and then email from the list. And so rather than having to type that and knowing the syntax, or flipping over to tokens to discover the syntax, instead we get that suggestion. There are variations of this that that you can use. For example, in the user namespace, and I'm going to demonstrate that here on another screen. If we go into tokens and take a look at the user namespace, one of the ways that you can do this is to say user : value, user : email. But another is to say that you want it for a particular user ID. So If you want this is composing in the old way, right? If you want the email address for user number 1 or user number 2, you can recall it using a parameter user ID. The automation, the IntelliSense automatically, the autocomplete rather, automatically knows about those, so we can build them with clicks. So user ID equals 1, user ID equals 2. It built the right syntax for me, and it suggested the values that you might use. So this is a work in progress. We are focused on delivering for the core tokens. All the core tokens, I believe, are represented, but some of the sub-tokens we're still working on delivering them well. The place that we're going with this is that not only the core tokens, but also the tokens that you might develop in your actions. For example, you might use a create action. Let's close this up and show what this looks like. We go to create or update tokens, and we may create a token called test with a value of ABC. Where we're going is that you'll be able, in subsequent steps, to recall the test token. It'll be there for you to use and to pull values out of. And so that'll help you make sure that you type them the same way and don't misspell, and just have quick access to them rather than having to go back and copy and paste. So big picture, we're trying to improve the developer experience. Now going back to a question from earlier about version control, Jim asks, is the vision for version control that items in the history be available for rollback before commit to Git? Great question, and I could answer it, but instead I'm going to let Patrick answer it. I'm going to throw Patrick under the bus. Patrick, do you happen to know if we have a vision to be able to roll back?
Yeah, I do think that that's part of the plan. I'm trying to. So he's asking before the commit to Git. So you're asking if you can roll back to a previous version from Git and then commit again, I think. Is that just for clarification? I mean, and I do think that's, I mean, that's part of what we want to be able to accomplish. But it's also about the moving changes from environment to environment as well, ultimately.
So let's do this, if you would. Can you grab that question, and then maybe we can kick it around a little bit, make sure we understand Jim's question, but then make sure we get an answer. So if you
yes.
Thank you. All right, moving on. So that was the big picture, and it's available on automation, and will be rolled out in multiple directions, right? In more, like, for example, into other areas of product like APIs, and then available for more than just core tokens. And I guess before I move on, I'll say too that part of that nothing about autocomplete prevents you from doing it manually. You'll see you can still, the way that you build tokens today will continue to work. So this is an enhancement, but that shouldn't impact the way that you use the product originally. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing, because I'm not sure if you said this earlier, but and please, correct me if I'm saying I shouldn't say, but I think that your user-defined tokens. So it's from what I can tell in my testing, it's not just right now the core tokens, but your user-defined tokens are available as well.
And I didn't test that far, so
okay, yep.
Maybe we can get an answer on that one as well.
And that's my what I'm experiencing with my testing. So Yep.
So that would be then that if you were to go into tokens and create your own namespace,
Yeah.
that those tokens would be able to be pulled out and auto completed. So cool, good information. Thank you. And the product owner is on call, and he says yes, correct. So we're getting confirmation across the board. Yep, Mark, glad that you're excited about it. We're excited about seeing it rolled out to any of us that have used the product for a long time. I think that it's going to add good value to the developer experience. So the next big story we're going to talk about is action validation. So when we have hundreds of actions in our product. The actions do a variety of things. They have a varying number of parameters from just a few to very many. For example, the email action has a dozen or more, and some of those are required in order for the action to do its work. And so the developer user interface is going to validate and enforce the rules at design time so that you can correct them while you're working instead of waiting for an error or for things to not work right. What we're delivering to you now, again, is the focus is of getting it right in automation. So action validation is available in automation for the developer, many of the parameters for many actions. Not every parameter, but we are, and not every validation, but the ones that we, for example, we're enforcing required. So let's see what that looks like. We have this same job that we're working on. Expand this to demonstrate validation. And so we have our send email action here. And if we try to save, let's see. Oh, I put a user, a to user here. To is required, right? So if I remove that, we are going to see that interesting. This autocomplete didn't want to go away there. So the two, it says the field is required. So you start to see the validation here. And then if we try to save it, we get a message that the highlighted actions, validation errors, like a missing parameter. And so it's reminding you to do that. If you close it up, it's going to tell you have missing parameters as a flag so that you can know to drill down and to see where the problem is. And then once you provide that, then it would be savable. If we disable this action, it's going to let us save it anyway. So if it's in a disabled state, if you don't have the answer to the question, one of the options available to you is to just disable that action and you can move on. But then when you get the answer and you can fill it in, then you can, maybe this is going to user email. That would be a good one. And so now it's going to save without complaining. So validation is the direction that we're going. Again, it's delivered in automation and where things are required. And I don't know if Patrick or Peter, if you have any, if there's other validations other than required, I haven't stumbled into them yet, but we're starting to enforce required. And this just requires attention for us to go through and do all of our actions. But the idea, again, we're trying to improve the developer experience by keeping you from discovering these on the fly. Good. So then within the administrative UI itself, again, for the developer, there's some things that are useful. So the first one is that jobs have namespaces and can be filtered. So if we save this job and close, take us back. So now we see we have the namespace of Café. I'm going to create another job just for comparison. So I'll create that in the default namespace, and it's going to be the dummy job. It won't do anything, but we'll save and close that. So we can see we have the default namespace with a dummy job in it, and the Café namespace with this job number 7 in it. You can filter by Café, for example, and get to just those. You can also sort by ID and name. I am putting in a feature request to be able to sort by name. If there's anybody that thinks that would be handy, raise your, excuse me, not sort, but filter by name. Anybody thinks that would be handy, raise your hand, and just so I can come at this with enthusiasm. But for example, in workflows, when we do a workflow, and I don't have any here, I'm going to create a very simple workflow that doesn't do anything again. Just call it new workflow. We'll go back here. So there's this filter by name or description. So you can say new, you can type, say new and filter the list. And I would love to see that same thing happen there. And we got 2 raised hands. So this is not as, I expected everyone to raise your hands. Okay, thank you guys. So that is the first one, that namespaces. We have namespaces in automation and they can be filtered. There is a small limitation at this point. You're going to be able to use the namespaces that got created elsewhere, like in entities or workflows. We haven't imported that logic to create a namespace in here. So if you want a different namespace in your automation jobs, just create it outside in either entities or workflows. Good. And so another thing on the list, that was the first one. Another thing on the list is that jobs now have a distinct URL. So for example, when we edit this job, a dummy job, notice up here it says it's edit job 8. If you wanted to be able to go directly to a job, you can now do that under the old UI. The job and the edit mode wasn't revealed in the path, and so you couldn't go directly to it. So that's a very minor thing, but you may find it useful. Here's a good one, the preventing overwrite by multiple users or windows. So if we have a job that's open and this is a dummy job, and we go to automation on another window, or one of our coworkers comes in and opens the same job and perhaps makes a small change to it, add a one-time trigger to this and save. Go back to the other window, and let's say that we're doing something completely different. We're adding create token, do we add a job value 23. When we try and save this, we get an error message that some other user by name, so it's me, but somebody else just modified the job. Avoid conflicts and overwriting, open the latest version and copy your current changes. So it's letting you know that there was a problem and that you can resolve it. If you go into see newer version, we're going to open up the same job with the other content available. So now you can resolve, you can figure out what changed differently and resolve it. So maybe copy from one to the other and save. If you don't like what was done on the other, you can save, and instead of seeing newer version, you can say overwrite, and then your version becomes the final. But at least you know there's a problem, and you can resolve it. So there was a question in the area, kind of going back to the last thing, can you run a job by calling the URL? We don't call out that feature anymore, but it is available if you want to dig into it. We used to make it as a published feature, the ability to put in an external URL and trigger a job. It was by GUID. We feel that a better answer is to execute to do it by way of API, which comes with a great deal of security that you can configure. And typically you would, in that scenario, you would set it up as a workflow so you could trigger the API as a workflow. So we feel like that's a better answer. If you do it that way, then your job can simply call the workflow as well. So you can reuse content in that way. But summarizing, there's two answers, right? You can still do it, and we haven't taken the feature out, but we don't publicize it, and we recommend you use APIs instead. So thanks for the question. So for those of you that are running in environments where you've got multiple users, hopefully you'll, or, you know, I've done this myself where I've overwritten my own self because I had two windows open and you lose track of which one is the most current version, which one you're working on. So at least you'll get a notification and the chance to recover instead of you've just lost your job. Ooh, that's bad, you lose your job. The last one, which is kind of a minor thing, but a small user interface change, is that we now have more standard buttons like we do in workflow, where you can cancel out of changing a job, you can save a job, or save and close. So if you want to save along the way, you're going to walk away for a little while, you can hit save and not lose your place, but stay right here in the job. Save and close closes the job. So a minor but useful change. Great. Aside from that, you're going to get some ongoing enhancements to the product. So, and I'll demonstrate a couple of these and then leave some of the others for you to get into. And I forgot to put one on my list, so I'm going to do this now. The ability to drag and drop actions. So let's work through that. If we have another create tokens, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. Does execute actions? I think we've delivered on this as well. But so the idea is you want to be able to move things around within the interface very easily, and we've had that for a while. But if you want to, you can move actions into and out of and execute actions, which will, I think, help you clean up your code a little bit, right? So lots of times you end up, if you do any kind of development at all, you end up with big stacks. I call them action stacks, big lists of actions, maybe a dozen actions that relate to doing some particular piece of logic, and you've done them in a big long stack, and then perhaps you decide that to clean that up, you can use an execute action, so you end up having one thing in the list that accomplish it, that might have 5 steps to get it accomplished. And so just as an organizational unit, being able to drag things into and execute actions is useful. You can also, I mean, it's not just limited to execute actions in the, for example, in the execute action on list entries and whatever. So the ability to drag and drop and move these around within the interface is another important feature that I omitted on my list. So thanks for the reminder, Peter. Good. So moving on to ongoing enhancements, listing filters that support HTML. This will take just a minute to build an answer for this one, but I'll take that minute. If we had yeah, glad to, I've got comment back from Mark about the ability to drag and drop into a list as a welcome thing. So glad we get something that was useful to you. I'm going to add a description property here that I'm going to make be HTML. We'll call this a a large text field that is searchable. And it doesn't really matter, but the idea is you're gonna provide a description of this company and it's gonna be HTML. So to make that happen, we've got to make a couple of changes. We go to the page and we have the ability to enter description, but it doesn't accept HTML. So we're going to modify the company form. And instead of it being a large text type of field control, we'll change this to I'm going to change it to a rich text from the wig. And with that change, we can now enter HTML quite easily. So let's enter a company. This is maybe we're going to bold that and add it. So we now have some HTML in our output. So we've got to make the change to the listing. And actually, we got a little bit out of order here. I'm going to go back. I forgot to make this filterable. That's what I'm demonstrating. So in our description, I want to make this filterable so we can show off what the problem is. So now we have a filter on description that we can use, and by default, if this contains HTML, it's just going to automatically render it as HTML, so it's visible and you can filter based on it. Let's have a contrasting record here. I'll make that underlined. So, oh, I didn't accurately get that underlined. There. And I don't know why it doesn't edit. So the fun of doing things live. If we were doing this, it would also typically make sense to check the allow HTML box in the listing so that the HTML renders on the output as well. But the feature enhancement was this used to have all the HTML tags as part of it, and now it renders it as HTML, so it's going to make sense to your users. So that's one simple change that we made. Another is that we added toggle switch styling option for checkbox fields. So what does this look like? If we go to, I added a page earlier about called test checkbox. We go there and add a form that we're going to custom configure. And we were to add checkboxes. Again, we can show off what the problem is, or the old way. So we'll add checkbox, and so this is the simple version. We'll also add checkbox list that has two options: first item, second item, and we'll add a checkbox drop down with checkboxes, and we'll give it some different items here, just to illustrate the differences. If we save these changes and take a look at our form as it appears, what we see is the checkbox shows up with that kind of a formatting. First item, second item, same kind of formatting, and in the same way, it's a checkbox. So we can use the, oops, wrong one. this name checkbox form. If we go into each of these and use the toggle switch variation instead of the default, we'll do this with all of them just to demonstrate them all at once. Then we get a different styling. So now it's an on-off switch instead of a checkbox, and it works in all the different types. Cool. So it doesn't change the functionality, it just changes the visual representation of how those come out. So those are two of the ongoing enhancements, but over the and again, some of these are you've seen in hotfixes in 1.22, but there's a minimum value parameter for number type fields. We have critical hotfixes, excuse me, if there are recommended hotfixes, you'll see those. Say file to disk action has room for different kinds of files. So ongoing enhancements. And then we have some bug fixes, and all of these were released as hotfixes over the fall. There's these 7 that I happen to pull out and 20 more. So all those get rolled into our version 1.23 as well. The last area that I'll point to, and again, a great time to, Matt, glad you like the checkbox update. The documentation, I've mentioned, I think on another of our events, maybe last week's Campfire, that we have an employee now, Angel, who is dedicated to improving our documentation. Some of our documentation is quite old. We're working to get it all in one place and then to be up to date as well. So we have a couple of articles that have been published already. And so, for example, if we go, I've got them linked here, but we now have an orientation guide. This falls under the important notes section. If you haven't worked with our documentation, it's at learn.plantanapp.com under documentation. And I'll just point out that there is a selector here as to what version this applies to. So version 1.22 documentation is the last that we have available. Then we have this next one called Next. This is the documentation we're about to release. And after 1.23 comes out, this will be called the 1.23 documentation. But we can get a peek into what it looks like in advance. And it's just letting you know it's not the most it's beyond, it's a documentation for what hasn't been released yet, so it's next. So for example, that important notes orientation guide is listed here within the product. And so that's there. If we take a look at our current version in the configuration, we can see the things that are here, and notice there's nothing. It talks about entities and SQL console and workflows, but there's nothing in here about APIs. When we go into our next, this unreleased documentation, we now see that there's APIs. So Angel has been hard at work for not providing an overview for what APIs and endpoints are, and then the actions that are available to you within there. So,
and also automation. This new as well. Yeah, that's another new one too.
Thank you. So all of what we're doing within automation is documented. This is again the pattern that we're going to, among the things we're going to try to do, that as we release new documentation, as we work in areas of the product and things come out. So as you can tell from my last 55 minutes, we've been working hard in automation, and you're going to see those things documented because documentation is working closely hand in hand with development. In the same way, you're going to see version control and the multi-environment orchestrator. That documentation will come out with 1.23, or at least that's the plan. And so you'll see this documentation be continuously improved, and then going back and including the some of our older documentation. So, and bringing it up to date, because some of that stuff is a couple years old as well. So lots of changes in our product, and Angel is keeping up with it well. So that's the nutshell of what we've been up to over the last couple of months. And give me just a moment to find. So I mentioned our schedule. I didn't put in a nice slide for this, but all of the things that we've been talking about here, that we are in the process of our internal user acceptance testing is scheduled to start tomorrow. And so for the next couple of days, we'll be hard at work to make sure that we're fixing things and not breaking things, and that it's ready for you to take a look at. We are scheduled to have the beta period, for those of you who are participating in beta, available starting Friday, probably Friday evening, November 4th. It will go for a week through November 11th, and then this version is due to be released on November 14th, Monday. Subject to change, but that's where we see it is at the moment. And so there again, we'll be talking more about our beta in Friday's low code Campfire. And so many of the people who participate in beta also participate in Campfire. If you want to be part of the beta program, that's the place to get started. Join us in Campfire. Let us know that you want to be part of it, and we'll include you. Gives you access to the version early. It gives you a list of things to test, and a mechanism to report things that you find back directly to the developers. So it's a good program, and does a lot to improve the quality of our product. While we let's see, in closing out, let's see. There is I'm going to go to a little bit of a technical topic, and just a warning that we've decided to put into the product for people who have not yet upgraded to version 1.22. Behind the scenes, there is a SQL user that is connected to the DNN instance. And for those of you who host from us, use the free plan, or use our standard instances, you don't have to worry about what I'm about to say. Our hosting team has set this up correctly for you. But for people, particularly who do on-premise, that we require that that SQL user have very high rights to be able to do what it needs to do within the database. So we require them to be a DB owner. At version 1.22, we have this requirement, but we don't warn you about it. So our upgrading process, or going to 1.22, if you don't have this requirement in place, if you set up correctly in your on-premise instance, the upgrade will fail, and you'll need to contact support. So we're going to put in a warning message about that, and just get you to think about the idea that you're going to need this set up properly before you go to 1.22. And I mention it because some of you who might have been holding back and going to 1.22 and thinking about going on to 1.23, this is something that needs to be set up correctly in your system before moving on. So with that little bit of warning, I think we've done a good job at telling you all of what we've been doing for the last couple of months. And hopefully you'll find it of value as you move to version 1.23 to either to test and eventually to use. So thank you all, and I look forward to talking with anyone who has more questions on Friday in the low code Campfire. Have a great week.